When someone has an avoidant attachment style, their entire emotional dynamic is built on one underlying principle: control through distance. They often maintain power by staying one step ahead emotionally, never giving too much, never letting you feel fully secure. This leaves you constantly guessing, constantly chasing, and ultimately stuck in a cycle where your emotions revolve around how available or unavailable they are on any given day. But the moment you stop playing that game, the dynamic shifts entirely. You no longer respond to their breadcrumbs. You no longer stretch yourself emotionally to get a response. You no longer twist yourself into shapes trying to decode mixed signals. You see it for what it is, a tactic that only works when you're still emotionally involved. So instead of trying to close the gap, you take a step back and do something radical. You reclaim your emotional space. And here's where regret begins for them. Avoidants don't regret losing someone who's emotionally invested. They regret losing someone who stopped being. The energy you once poured into them is suddenly no longer available, that gap they thought they wanted. Now it feels real, and it's no longer something they can control. The script flips, because they've relied on you playing your part, reaching out, caring more, soothing the tension. But now there's nothing for them to respond to. You stop trying to fix it, and now they're left in the silence of their own creation. At first, they may try to convince themselves they're fine, that this is what they wanted, that space is good. But soon that space becomes uncomfortable. Because now you're not just distant, you're emotionally unavailable in a way that doesn't revolve around them anymore. And that's new. Suddenly, the power they felt in your desperation vanishes, and they feel the one thing they've worked so hard to avoid, the weight of losing something real. Because when you stop playing their game, they're forced to sit with the truth. You were never chasing them out of weakness. You were showing up because you cared. Now that you don't, they realize they had something meaningful, and they pushed it away. And that's when regret floods in, not because you begged them to see your worth, but because you showed them what it looks like when someone who knows their worth walks away. You stop playing the game. And the game wasn't fun without you. In fact, it became terrifying. Because now the question playing in their mind isn't, will you come back? It's, did I lose the only person who ever actually understood me? And that is the moment that triggers instant regret in the avoidant. Avoidant individuals are not typically shaken by loud emotions. In fact, they often expect them. They anticipate anger, tears, frustration, because these reactions confirm the narrative in their mind. See, this is why I can't get too close. People become too much. They need too much. In a twisted way, your emotional outbursts justify their distance. They see your reaction as validation for their fear of intimacy. But when you respond with indifference, calm, composed, emotionally neutral, that's what truly unsettles them. Indifference is powerful because it's not performative. It doesn't scream. It doesn't beg. It doesn't chase. It simply removes the emotional fuel that kept the avoidant dynamic alive. And unlike anger, which they can dismiss as drama, indifference sends a very different message. I no longer need you to be different. I've accepted who you are, and I've chosen to step away. Avoidants don't expect that. They're used to being the emotionally distant one. So when you match or exceed their emotional distance, they feel something they're not used to feeling. A loss of power. Because now the spotlight has shifted. You're not emotionally reacting to their withdrawal. You're just not reacting at all. Indifference makes them wonder, what changed? Because you were once invested. You once tried. You once explained yourself in paragraphs and fought for the connection. Now there's no effort, no energy, just space. And that space doesn't feel peaceful to them. It feels threatening. They can brush off your tears, they can ignore your calls. But what they can't ignore is the space that's been created by your emotional neutrality. It forces them to reflect, to sit with their own discomfort, to finally confront the idea that maybe, just maybe, you're moving on. Not to punish them, but because you've outgrown needing them to validate your worth. That's when regret hits. Because the avoidant person suddenly realizes they've lost access to something meaningful. And they lost it not in a fiery breakup, not in dramatic closure, but in the slow, steady, unbothered way you let go. That's haunting. That sticks with them. Because it means you've accepted who they are, and you've decided you no longer want to invest energy in trying to change or understand them. And deep down they know, indifference doesn't come from hate. It comes from healing, from peace, from growth. And nothing triggers more regret in an avoidant than realizing someone they once emotionally controlled now feels nothing but clarity in their absence. They didn't expect you to stop caring. They didn't believe you could be the one to detach. But now that you have, they're left in silence. And that silence is filled with one question. What if I pushed away the only person who truly saw me, and now they don't even look back? When you respond to an avoidant person with emotional maturity, it immediately highlights their own emotional immaturity. It's like holding up a mirror they've spent years avoiding. Most avoidant individuals are not used to calm, grounded reactions. They're accustomed to either being chased or confronted. But when you step out of that pattern and respond with emotional intelligence, by choosing clarity over chaos, boundaries over begging, composure over conflict, it disrupts their entire emotional rhythm. Emotional maturity says, I see what you're doing, and I don't need to play into it. It doesn't seek to punish or prove. It simply exists in truth and confidence. And that's what they find deeply unsettling, because you're no longer reacting in the way they've come to expect from people who care about them. You're not falling into the spiral of trying to make them comfortable at your own expense. You're not shrinking yourself to keep them from running. Instead, you're showing up with calm strength. You're listening more than you're explaining. You're observing more than you're chasing. You're responding, not reacting. And that's when something changes in the dynamic. They start to feel exposed. Not because you're judging them, but because your maturity reveals what they've been avoiding. Their inability to emotionally engage in a healthy way. They're not ready to meet you where you are. And it becomes obvious. The difference is so clear. You're taking ownership of your emotions while they continue to deflect, distance, and avoid. And for the first time, it's not something they can hide behind. Your grounded response shows them what a healthy connection actually looks like and how far from it they truly are. That's the moment when regret begins to creep in. Not in a dramatic way, but slowly, subtly. Because now they realize they're losing someone who didn't fight with them, but someone who understood them. Someone who offered stability, not volatility. Someone who stayed centered when things got hard, instead of spiraling. And here's the most painful part for the avoidant. They start to understand that emotional maturity is exactly what they needed, but didn't recognize when it was right in front of them. Your ability to stay calm under emotional pressure, to express boundaries without blame, to care without controlling, that's not weakness, that's power, and it exposes their lack of it. Avoidants push people away out of fear, but what they eventually regret is pushing away someone who wasn't trying to control them, just trying to connect with them. And once you show that kind of presence, and walk away from their chaos without trying to fix it, it haunts them. Because you didn't need them to grow. You simply showed them what growth looked like. And they weren't ready, so they let you go. But your maturity, that's what they'll remember when the silence settles. Avoidants are experts at creating emotional distance. They rely on space to protect themselves from vulnerability. When conflict arises or intimacy deepens, their instinct is to pull away, to retreat into silence or detachment. But here's the irony. They're only comfortable with their silence. They use silence as a shield, a power move, a way to regulate the discomfort they feel around closeness. What they're not prepared for is your silence. Your silence isn't avoidance, it's clarity. And it forces them to confront what they've been running from all along. When you stop responding, stop explaining, stop trying to keep the connection alive, something shifts. Your silence becomes a mirror. It reflects back the consequences of their emotional withdrawal in a way that no words ever could. Avoidants can dismiss your arguments. They can justify your anger. They can even rationalize why you're upset. But they cannot escape the discomfort of a silence that feels final. This kind of silence doesn't scream, I'm angry at you. It whispers, I'm done giving energy to someone who won't meet me halfway. And that's a terrifying realization for someone who thought they could keep you emotionally hooked while keeping their own heart at a distance. Your silence removes the drama from the equation. It removes the chase. It removes the emotional ping-pong they've become so comfortable playing. And suddenly they're not responding to you. They're sitting with themselves, with their own thoughts, their own choices, their own fears, and that's when it starts to hurt. Not because you're punishing them, but because your absence creates space for reality to echo louder than your presence ever did. Avoidants often imagine that people will always be waiting, that if they pull away, you'll reach out. If they stay silent, you'll fill the gap. But when you don't, they're forced to feel what they've been avoiding. The loss. Not the theoretical one, the real one. The emotional energy you brought, the warmth, the connection, the effort, it's all gone not because you shouted, not because you slammed doors, but because you simply stopped giving them access to your emotional world. That kind of silence is powerful. It commands respect. It says, I no longer argue with confusion. I choose peace instead. And in that peace, you become unforgettable because you didn't leave chaos behind. You left clarity. You didn't fight to be seen. You walked away quietly, knowing your value wasn't up for debate. And that's the regret they feel the most. Not the kind that hits in the moment, but the kind that grows louder over time. Every day they sit with that silence, it gets heavier. Because deep down they know, it wasn't the silence they gave you that hurt the most. It was the silence you gave them. Avoidants feel most comfortable when you're the one doing the emotional heavy lifting. When you're reaching out, trying to fix things, initiating conversations, or holding the space for the relationship, they feel a strange kind of relief. It confirms their belief that they can keep you close without ever really having to open up or step forward. Your presence, your effort, your consistency, it allows them to stay emotionally passive. But when you withdraw that presence, something very different begins to happen. Your absence doesn't create peace, it creates pressure. They don't realize this at first. Initially, your silence might feel like a break for them, the one who didn't have to do the work, the one who could stay distant without consequence. Now, they're faced with a new reality. You're not waiting anymore. And that's what triggers the regret, because they start to realize you were never powerless. You were just choosing to care. You were choosing to try. You were choosing to love them through their walls. But once you stopped choosing them, they no longer had power over you. That's what makes them panic. Not your absence, but the fact that your absence feels peaceful, liberated, whole. The avoidant who once felt safe by being distant now feels unsafe because you're no longer close. And it's not because you changed who you are. It's because you finally remembered who you are. And in doing so, you showed them what true power looks like. Quiet confidence, emotional independence, and the willingness to walk away from anything that requires you to shrink. They didn't expect you to walk away. They didn't believe you'd stop trying. But when you reclaimed your power, they realized they lost theirs. Avoidants often thrive in ambiguity. They create emotional confusion, offer just enough to keep you close, but never enough to let you feel secure. One day they're warm and engaging, the next they're distant and cold. This hot and cold behavior keeps you emotionally off balance, always wondering what you did wrong, how you can fix it, or what you need to do to earn their affection again. But something powerful happens when you stop chasing answers, when you stop demanding clarity and start providing it for yourself. Avoidants don't expect you to step out of the confusion. They expect you to stay in it, trying harder, explaining more, waiting longer. The moment you stop seeking validation or closure from them, and instead give yourself both, the dynamic shifts. You're no longer playing their game. You're writing your own rules. You're choosing truth over longing. And the truth is, people who truly care don't keep you guessing. When you choose clarity, when you say, I see what's happening here, and I'm no longer available for this emotional inconsistency, you set a boundary that the avoidant wasn't prepared for. You reject the ambiguity they've always relied on to keep you emotionally tethered. And that's when their sense of control begins to unravel. Because for the first time they realize they don't get to be unclear and still keep you around. You begin to live in emotional alignment. You stop asking if they care. You notice they don't show it. You stop trying to read into their silence. You accept that it is a message. You stop hoping they'll change. You focus on changing your response. That's not coldness. That's wisdom. It's the wisdom that says, if someone wants me, I won't have to guess. And if I have to guess, I don't want them. This clarity forces the avoidant to confront something they avoid at all costs. Their behavior has consequences. When you refuse to participate in emotional games, the game ends. And in the silence that follows, they don't find peace. They find regret. Because the confusion that once gave them control now becomes the very reason they lost someone who was once willing to stay. Your clarity takes away their favorite hiding place. Emotional vagueness. It exposes the reality they've been avoiding. That healthy connection requires presence, consistency, and emotional courage. You were willing to offer all of that. They weren't. And now you've stopped asking for it. That's what stays with them. Not your anger, not your sadness, but the moment you stopped asking and started accepting. Because in accepting who they are, you freed yourself and left them to face who they're not ready to become. Avoidants often expect you to make your love loud. They expect declarations, protests, efforts to pull them back every time they push away. They believe that as long as you still react, even if it's with frustration or pain, you still care.